First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. Thanks for joining us. We are here with breaking news, and joining us here in studio, I'm Greg Nibbler, joined by Adrian Thomas. And Adrian, a big development here happening pertaining to the ICE facility there in downtown Portland.
Yeah, we're seeing more legal proceedings play out in federal court tied to protests at the ICE facility. Of course, throughout the fall, we saw the issue of the National Guard being deployed to Portland in response to ICE protests and the legal fight that played out in federal court. But now we are seeing another legal battle play out tied to protests at the ICE building. This time it's about federal law enforcement use of force on protesters. And this afternoon, a federal judge here in Portland granted a temporary restraining order restricting federal law enforcement using any type of crowd control measures, deploying chemical munitions or projectiles at protesters who are at the ICE building. And this really is part of a larger legal fight that has played out for the last few months. Late last year, there were a handful of protesters who filed a complaint in federal court complaining about the federal law enforcement at the ICE facility using too much force on protesters, and this has basically been a legal saga that's been playing out over the last few months, but really came to a head over the weekend when ICE, and we have some of the video right now, when there were large protests at the ICE facility this weekend, several hundred people over multiple days. And yeah, you can see some of the tear gas that was deployed there. And there were a handful of new filings in this case on Sunday night asking a federal judge for a temporary restraining order because of how tense the protests were this weekend. There were reports of federal law enforcement using tear gas. Obviously, our cameras captured that, as well as use of flashbangs and other projectiles that were shot at protesters. So it's a really big development, and basically what the judge is saying is that while this legal saga continues to play out, federal law enforcement are prohibited from using any type of projectile munitions or chemical munitions at protesters unless they pose an imminent threat of physical harm to law enforcement or another person. Many filings in this case so far have alleged that, there were peaceful protesters who were hit by tear gas canisters, hit by pepper balls, people who were not actively doing anything other than standing in a public area peacefully protesting, yet they were, either pepper sprayed, as you can see in the video right here, someone washing her eyes out, or tear gassed, or had some other type of crowd dispersal, device shot at them. Now, this order right now applies only to the ICE facility on South McAdam Avenue. And the judge's ruling in this case also said that federal law enforcement at the ICE facility can't use these type of munitions, chemical or projectile munitions, in response to people who are trespassing, protesters refusing to move, or protesters refusing to obey an order to leave the area or get out of the way. Really, it's tailoring the language in this order to only permit law enforcement to use these kinds of chemical munitions, projectile munitions, in order to, if there is an imminent physical threat to someone.
Okay. Is there a determination of what exactly that means?
That's where it gets a little bit vague. And
Yeah.
One of the things that we've obviously seen from the Department of Homeland Security in Portland and across the country when we've seen ICE officers, Border Patrol, other federal law enforcement use force, in recent months, is that the narrative coming from the federal government is that there were agitators, protesters who were being physically violent with federal law enforcement, and those law enforcement officers were fearing for their safety or their life, so they used,
Right.
insert X
Whatever
force,
measure
use of force here, whether that be, firing their weapon, as we saw in
Live ammunition,
Minnesota, or live ammunition, or non-lethal methods, like tear gas, like we see here. So, really, this is it's a big development in this whole story we've seen over the last several months of protests at the South McAdam ICE facility. What comes next is that this temporary restraining order is good for 2 weeks, and there is going to be an evidentiary hearing on March 2nd in federal court here in Portland in regards to this case. So this is going to be a very similar process to what we saw with the National Guard federal case that played out. There's a temporary restraining order right now where a judge is saying, hey, you have to limit your use of force right now while this case plays out. Okay. So this temporary restraining order is good for 2 weeks. The plaintiffs in this case, the protesters, they could ask for the TRO to be extended. They could also file for a preliminary injunction, which basically, if a judge were to grant a preliminary injunction, that would mean that the temporary restraining order would stay in place until basically that type of order would stay in place until this case plays out in federal court. So it'll be really interesting to see what this means for federal law enforcement here on the ground in Portland, and also how this plays into possible future demonstrations at that facility.
Yeah, I would think that, whenever the next demonstration is there, this is going to be tested.
Absolutely.
This limit.
And, in this day and age when everyone's filming on their phones and we're obviously there with our cameras, we can clearly see what happens.
Yeah.
We can clearly see how protesters are acting and how law enforcement are acting. So, what if federal law enforcement were to kind of push the boundaries a little bit on this temporary restraining order, what would that even look like? There's a lot of unanswered questions here. It's a big development in this case, but it remains to be seen just how effective this might be.
Which seems to be a lot of these cases, even going back to the National Guard, trials that went on and everything else. It's fairly, not necessarily unprecedented, but there's not really a pathway where we've seen this play out exactly like this before.
Exactly.
So this now out there, this temporary restraining order, you said it's for 2 weeks, just to clarify that. 2 weeks, so that could be extended, that could end then. And when does the actual trial start? And this is, I believe, it's the protesters represented by the ACLU, is that right?
Yes, correct. And so there's not an actual trial date set yet, or at the moment. All we have is an evidentiary hearing on March 2nd, but that will be a big hearing day, because that will essentially be both sides presenting evidence in the case. So expect in the courtroom to see a lot of photos, videos, things like that.
Very similar, probably to the National Guard side. All right, well, we do have this all, of course, at kptv.com as well, for you to go there and review that, and all of our reporting. As Adrian mentioned, we've been down there a lot. And there's video, there's everything that you can want to know about that. You can find there on the website. And this is what I'm holding here, is the entire restraining order. It's quite a few pages. And I know Adrian's been going through this, and we went through this as quick as possible to get this information to you here. This breaking news. Anything else that you think is important for people to know?
I think just it's important to keep in mind that this is very much an ongoing federal court case at the moment. This temporary restraining order is an order from a federal judge to the Department of Homeland Security, specifically to federal law enforcement at the ICE facility, to not use these chemical or projectile munitions unless there is imminent physical threat to law enforcement. But it will remain to be seen just how that plays out.
Yeah. All right. Well, Adrian, thank you very much for being down here to bring this. And again, this is Fox 12 Now. This is one of the things that we can do here, is bring you this breaking news and actually break down that news as much as we possibly can here once that comes out. So if something else develops between now and 4 p.m., we'll certainly be here with that for you. Otherwise, we'll have a lot more coverage of this coming up at 4 p.m. And as I mentioned, KPTV.com, a great way to really digest this a little bit more if you really want to dig into what's happened, what's led up to this, and maybe what's going to come next. We'll all have to find out about that part. So, all right, Adrian, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. This is Fox 12 Now. We'll return you to your regular program.